Hello, this is Vicky from the Spellbound Bead Company, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to make this stepped tile bracelet using square stitch. If you've not done square stitch before, or if you'd just like a refresher on how to do the stitch, then we have got a couple of introduction videos that we've released, which are the previous two videos on the playlist. So if you want to go back and have a look at those and then come back when you're feeling confident. If not, let's get started. So this bracelet is done using 4 colours of size 8 seed beads, and I've also got 2 6mm facets that I'm going to use for the clasp. So what you need to do is make sure that your seed beads are all approximately the same size. So I wouldn't mix the brands of different seed beads. So I wouldn't use a Preciosa seed bead and a Miyuki seed bead next to one another, because there's slight variances in the size. So the easiest thing to do, the easiest way to check your sizes, is to just get a couple of head pins and just thread 10 beads onto a head pin, and then 10 of the next bead onto a second head pin, and just line them up against one another and check that they're roughly the same size. If there's one that is considerably narrower, consider changing it so that you don't get a puckered edge on your bracelet. It's not altogether unattractive to have this, but for the sake of what the design, if they're all lining up nicely, then it will just give you a crisper edge. So it depends what sort of finish you're going for. I've got a size 10 beading needle, and I've got around about 1.5 meters of Nymo D thread that I'm using, and I've just tied a keeper bead about 20 centimeters or so from the end of the thread. The thread that's left will be used to make the fastening, the loop for the bead and loop fastening. So make sure you don't skimp on this starting tail, because you'll make your life more difficult when it comes to the end of the bracelet. So to get started, we're going to make a panel that is 5 beads wide. So we're going to pick up 5 of the first colour bead. There. I'm going to bring them down to the keeper bead, and then we're going to start adding the next row. So we're going to pick up 1, and using square stitch we're going to go through the bead on the row below and back through the bead we've just added. And we're going to do this across. So pick up 1 and go back through. Now this first row is a little bit wobbly because you haven't got an awful lot to hold on to, but it will square up as you go along. So here we go. And just, that's 4 through there, and then that's 5. And then what we'll do is we'll come back through the first 5 of the first row there, and we'll come through the 5 of the beads that we've just added, and that will even it up and bring your beads into line. Now just a note here, because I'm using a frosted transparent bead, the thread will show slightly through this particular bead, which is why I'm using the dark purple. If I'd used a lighter thread, you'd get like a little pale coloured stripe showing through, so just bear that in mind when you're choosing your thread colour. And you'll also see it on either side of the bracelet, so just on the edge of the bracelet here you can just see a bit of the thread, so bear that in mind when you're working. If you want to use a light coloured bead but have a dark edge to your work, then you can, once you've made your bracelet, you can go along and colour in the end of the thread with a permanent marker if that's something you want to do, if it's looking particularly obvious, but that's up to you. So next row we're just going to do the same thing again. So we're going to add another 5 beads, 1 to each of the previous row. So here we go, that's 1, Now, because we're using seed beads here, you will get because they're slightly rounded, you will get a little bit of movement in the beads and a little bit of texture, which is really nice. You can also do this same technique using cylinder beads, things like Delicas. If you're doing this in Delica size 11s, which are the size Delica that we sell, then just bear in mind that 5 of those is going to make a much narrower square. So it will be really dainty. But if you're wanting to do something that's a bit wider on your wrist, then you will need to increase your bead count, probably to something like 9 or 10 beads in width. But you can just try it against you, because that first row of beads will show you how wide your bracelet's going to be. So we're just going to reinforce again here. So you can adjust the length to fit you how you want it to. So it's entirely up to you what you want to do. So here we go again. We're going to add another 5 beads here. Oop, no, need to come through first. And 5. Okay, so that's 5 there. And then what we're going to do is reinforce again. And then we're going to increase at the end of this row to start the next row, before we start the next row. So I'm going to pick up 3 more of the 4th colour bead here, so the blue bead, and we're going to hold those up against the row so they sit nice and snugly. Now, the way this sequence works is I'm just going to go back to the beginning again. So we're going to pick up this one, and now we're going to add 5 beads across here. So we'll add 1 each to the 3 new beads that we've added, and just make sure if you can't, now you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing, because it's important that you pinch this in your fingers so that you don't end up with a big gap here. If you've got a gap like you can see just here, then just take your thread back slightly and just make sure that you pull it tight. So push those blue beads up nice and tight. Just make sure I'm holding the thread there. Push those up nice and tight, and then tighten the pink bead up. And what that will do, because of the way the stitch works, it will essentially lock that in place, so it's not going to move anywhere. So that's 1 bead, and then we'll add bead number 2. And this will wobble about a little bit on the end, but don't worry about that, because we're going to reinforce it, which will tighten it up. So that's bead 3. Bead 4. And bead 5. Okay, so that's the 5 beads added. And then we'll come back through the 5 beads that we've just stitched to. Oops. There. And through those 5 there. And you can see the stepped increase here. And then we'll just add the next row. So 5 beads again. And 5. Now try and keep your tension even as you're working this stitch, because if you vary the tension. So if you work a loose row and then a tight row, you'll get shaping along the edge, which isn't quite what we're aiming for in this particular instance. So there we go. So we'll work the next row. And once you get into the rhythm of this stitch and the increases, it's actually very quick to work on because you've only got short rows, so that does make it nice and easy for you. And there we go. So we'll, whoops, reinforce the row. Again. Now, we're going to work the next increase, but we're coming out of the wrong end, because if we do the increase this side, then we'll get an offset square that, whoops, untangle that. We'll get an offset square which will look like this, which is a variation if you want to do it. So this one, you're increasing at the end that your needle's coming out of, but because we want it to be stepped like this, so every row's worked in the same direction, we just need to reposition the needle at this end of the row. So to do that, we're going to come back through a couple of beads on the previous row. So I've come through 3 beads on the previous row, and then I'm going to skip across and come out the last 2 beads on the row that we've just finished, so that pink row we've just finished. And again, we're going to pick up 3 beads for the increase, hold those tight, and then we're going to work the next row across again. Oops. So if we've got those there, you can just slide those up so they're in the right place for the end of the row. And again. Sorry if my thumb's in the way here, it's a little bit tricky to hold this first end of the row. And there's 4. And that's 5. And again, we'll reinforce, and I'm sure you've got the hang of this sequence by now. So, and we'll work back across this row in the other direction. Now, if it's easy for you, if you prefer working either towards yourself or away from yourself, you can turn your work over at the end of every row so that you're always working in the same direction. But if you're going to do that, just pay attention to where you're putting your increases so that you don't end up turning your increase round halfway through your bracelet. Although that could be an interesting design. It's not quite what we're aiming for. So here we go. And that's basically what you're going to do for the whole length of your bracelet. So do 3 plain rows and then an increase row. So we've got another plain row to do here. And you can see, because we're using the size 8 seed beads, it's growing quite quickly, and it's still quite because we're only using a small bead count, it's still quite a dainty bracelet. You don't have to do this in 4 different colours. You can do it all in 1 colour. You could do it in 2 colours. You could do it so that the centre bead of each row is the same colour, so you get a stripe coming up through the bracelet. That could be quite attractive. You could do like a zigzag lightning type design. You can do lots of different things. So if you do try this bracelet, if you do come up with your own variations, please let us know. We love to see what you do. You can tag us in social media. You can find us on Instagram at Spellbound Bead Co. You can find us on Facebook at Spellbound Bead Co again. You can stick a photograph in the comments below if you want to. We'd love to see what you do. We do like to see people's work. There we go. So there we go. So we're ready to do the next increase. So again, come through 3 beads on the row below and then 8 through the last 2 on your the row you've just finished, and then we're going to add another increase. So another 3 beads to start, and we're going to work this way across until we get to the length of the bracelet that we want. So I will work this last repeat and then I will show you how to add the clasp so that you're not sat watching me thread do the same thing for the whole length of the bracelet. So I'll do one more set of repeats and then I will add the clasp. So that's 5. And then come back. Oops, try not to stab yourself with the needle. Now, if you do run short of thread as you're working, which you will do because 1.5 meters isn't enough to do the whole length of the bracelet, because square stitch is quite a thread hungry stitch, then all you need to do is take the needle off the working thread and leave it dangling and join in a new thread the same way as you do the thread at the start of the row. So just tie a keeper bead onto your new thread. Start working. If you need to just weave through a row and come back out into the right place, and then carry on making the length of the bracelet. And then when you've finished the bracelet, you've got it to the length that you want, then you can finish off your thread ends, which we have got videos to show you how to do. So just basically weave through your beads, tie a knot around a working thread, weave through a few more beads, just so that you know that your thread's nice and secure. But by doing it that way, you're not going to tie a knot in a place that's inconvenient that you're going to have to go back through again. So don't worry about finishing your thread ends off as you go along. Just do them when you get to the end of the bracelet. So last row, and then we'll add the clasp to this incredibly tiny bracelet that will probably fit a little dainty pixie. And 5. There we go. And again, we're going to reinforce this last row. So come through and then come back through. And when we're joining the clasp on, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're adding both ends of the clasp to the squares on the same side so that it will sit directly. So what we're going to do is we're going to reposition the needle so that it's coming out the opposite side again. So on the same side that you'd add the increase. So again, come through a couple of beads. Ooh. Got a little bit tight on the tension here. It's getting a bit tight to squeeze through. There we go. And again, come up and out the end of the row. So what we're going to do is we're going to thread on. It doesn't really matter what sequence of beads you use here. So I'm going to pick up a blue, then one of my 6mm facets. I've got 2 different ones here just to keep the stripy theme going. If you want to use 2 that are the same, then you can do that. doesn't really make that much of a difference what you use. So we'll pick up that, and then we'll go for some contrast. So we'll go pink, we'll go blue, we'll go pink, we'll pick up the other 6mm facet, and then we'll pick up a pink bead on the end. No, we won't. Let's pick up a purple because that's a bit more of a contrast. Okay, and thread those down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to leave aside that last bead we put on, and we're just going to come back down through those beads that we've just threaded on, back down to the beginning of the sequence. And then we're going to go through the bead that we're coming out of in the square stitch path. So we're going to go back in from the opposite side, and what that'll do is it'll just pull your beads so they're sitting parallel with this edge here, so you've got a continuous line across the edge. And we're going to reinforce this thread by going through all these beads a second time. So all the way up to the top, through that bead on the end, and back down through. There we go. And that's going to be nice and secure. So we'll go through that bead on the end again, and then we're just going to finish this thread end off. So I'll just come through a few beads here, and then we'll change direction and come through and back. And back again. Oops. Oh, got that thread caught there. Okay, so we're not going through that one again. We'll go this way. And then we'll tie a knot between those, around that thread there, and through. And then what we'll do is we'll just pass back through another couple of beads on the previous row, like so, and then we'll trim that thread. So don't trim your thread right next to the knot, because that way you're not won't just work itself loose. And try not to leave your tail on the end of your bracelet, because the thread can just work loose and you'll end up with just a little thread tail that's not particularly attractive. So here we go, we'll put the loop on the other end. So we'll take the keeper bead off like that. Let's take the keeper bead off the end, and we'll rethread the needle. And we're going to reposition the needle again so it's coming out on the opposite side of the bracelet. There we go. And then to this side, we're just going to add a loop of beads that will fit over this tag. So I'm just going to pick up the sequence. So I'll go across. So that's 8. I'll try one more. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you just loop through that bead on the corner again and just see how that fits. You want it to be snug, but you don't want to have to force the bead through, because that way you might end up snapping your thread. So there we go. So I've got 12 beads in a circle there. I've gone back through the first bead, the bead that I was coming out of, which is the first bead on the corner of the square motif. And again, we're just going to reinforce these beads. So we're just going to go through all of these beads a second time. Okay, so go through them singly or just a couple of beads at a time, whatever's easiest for you. There we go. So that's reinforced there. Just double check that that clasp will still fit. Yep, that's plenty of plenty tight enough on there. Adjust that if you need to. If you've got lots of frosted beads, you might find you need to add an extra bead because frosted beads have a tendency to be slightly smaller. If you use coated beads, then they tend to be slightly chunkier, so you might find you need 1 or 2 less beads. And then we're just going to finish this thread off in the same way as we did the other end. So through a few, go back on ourselves. Oops. There, and this time we'll go around that thread in there and come back through a few this way, and then back through a few that way. I'll go through one more there, and then trim that thread off. There we go. And there we have our diamond tile bracelet.